This is Kate Swoboda, creator of YourCourageousLife.com, director of the Courageous Living Coach certification at TeamCLCC.com, and author of the book, The Courage Habit, which is available at booksellers and at Amazon. The Your Courageous Life podcast is all about going after what you want and creating and living a more courageous, emotionally resilient life. Might drop a couple of F-bombs, so maybe don't listen with your kids in the backseat of the car. And here we go with today's episode. Hey, everybody. Today's episode is going to be all about kids. So those of you who don't have kids and are like, I don't really need to hear about kids. It's worth considering that the things I'll be talking about in today's episode could be really helpful for you to look at through the lens of your inner child, the part of you that maybe didn't get the parenting that you wish you had gotten. And there was definitely a time when, I'm trying to think of what year this would have been, because I started working with my counselor, coach, guru man, Matthew, back in 2006, I think. And at the time, I had this whole conception of self-help as being like, I wanted cool self-help. I wanted intellectual self-help. I didn't want any of this like inner child, positive thinking. This is my voice, in case anyone was wondering, what is our voice doing right now? That's what my voice is doing right now. I didn't want any of that stuff. Oh my God, it's so dorky and cheesy. I don't need the self-help cheese. Yeah, that's who I would have been at the time. And now I'm like, oh yeah, inner children. There is a part of us that gets really, really activated, particularly when we're afraid. And that inner kid part of us needs gentleness, needs care, often needs boundaries, actually, and needs to expand its skill set. So a lot of what I'm going to be saying today about parenting is going to apply to the inner kids as well. So whether you're a parent or not, there's something here for everybody if you're into this. So, raising courageous kids. Courage in this case, we're going to define as being kids that are more emotionally resilient. Okay, so I'm not necessarily saying that if your kid is afraid of swimming, that the aim we're looking for here is that your kid is like, all right, I'm going to jump straight into the pool. No, if your kid is afraid of swimming, that's fine. And we're not talking about specific fears, topical fears. We're not even talking about eradicating fear. Hopefully anyone who's been around my work long enough knows that I don't do fearless. I'm not into fearless. I don't think anyone is fearless. I think kids are very wise. I think they have reasons for doing what they do, even though it might seem illogical to us as adults a lot of the time. So when I'm talking about raising courageous kids, I'm talking about raising emotionally resilient kids. And to me, what that looks like would be things like a child who is able to feel their feelings, has some level of ability to be flexible and adaptive. I don't mean flexible and adaptive the way that adults are flexible and adaptive, where we kind of squelch it and just move on. I mean flexible and adaptive around not having a complete meltdown every single time if you thought you were going to go to the park today and it turns out that it's too rainy and cold. It's a meltdown sometimes, or getting pretty upset sometimes. That's within kind of an expected developmental range especially for small kids. But is there some level of adaptation and flexibility possible? Curiosity. Curiosity speaks to emotional resilience, because kids that feel safe to take risks and to try things out are curious. Questioning things. Kids that feel safe to question things, even frustratingly sometimes boundaries. That is also a sign of an emotionally resilient child, because questioning things implies that things don't have to be rigid or fixed, and that child feels safe enough to push boundaries with you. If a kid doesn't feel safe, they'll go into freeze, fight, or flight. But if a kid actually feels safe enough to push boundaries with you And again, this is one of the annoying things about being a parent. I'm with you in solidarity here. But when a kid feels some level of safety around being able to push boundaries, that is a sign that they are actually adaptive, that they're actually more resilient because they don't think that their safety is threatened by pushing a little bit. And also, the more emotionally resilient a kid is, the faster emotions tend to pass through them. So that's what it can look like. And, hey, I am not about to do an episode on parenting here in which I tell you that you have to do all of your parenting differently. I am not a parenting expert. What I do have that informs my experience are two things. One, I am a parent of a young child. I have a 5-year-old now as of recording this. She's 5-year-old girl. And I also have done some research into child development. And I think research into child development always has to be taken with a grain of salt because our culture changes. We learn more about how kids adapt. We develop new parenting strategies. Kids are really influenced by a mix of the authority figures that are in their lives, their own personal will or personality or what they come into the world with, and the culture around them. So if we're thinking about things like what's happening with COVID-19, and I know that there are parents who are going into a lot of fear around how COVID-19 is going to affect their kids. Well, what I would point out to you is that COVID-19, which is the social or environmental influence, is not the only factor. Your kids are also looking at you as an authority figure to take their cues for how they should interpret this situation. And your kids are also coming into the world with their own stuff. There are kids who come into the world more sensitive than other kids. There are kids that come into the world more curious than other kids. So there's some level of, yes, you as a parent can have an influence, and yes, socially, external factors can have an influence. And then there's also this element of your kid is who your kid is, and that's how it goes. And frustratingly, sometimes that's how it goes. And thank goodness that's how it goes. So this, unique little ball of frustration and joy that is ridden into your life, maybe several of them if you have more than one kid. So here we are, I'm recording this during COVID-19, but the same things are going to apply even outside of those circumstances where it's like, okay, I'm feeling the stress. I want to try to support my kids as they're going through this kind of stress. What are some things that I can do? Well, first thing I'm going to speak to is actually what I'd say not to do. And it's very in vogue to do this, particularly with really, really little kids like 2-year-olds. But I'm going to say not to do this. And what I'm going to say not to do is distraction and redirection. There's been a huge movement, particularly for little kids, and I've seen it all through my daughter's every daycare she's gone to, every preschool she's gone to, even to some degree by the time she started public school, some level of distraction and redirection. Like instead of telling a child, no, you cannot do that, trying to distract them with another toy. And I really have to say, if that is a form of playing kick the can with the problem out to another time. It is okay for kids to be told no and to then have meltdowns as a result of being told no. And then to see that even though they were told no, and even though they had a meltdown, which probably didn't feel very good, certainly didn't feel very good for the parent, I'd imagine, even though those things happened, they are okay. It is good for kids to be given boundaries from an authority figure that says, this is a no, and then to experience their own emotions, even intense emotions, and then be supported in going through those emotions. So just to give an example, when my daughter was around 2 years old, a huge trend in every school, every daycare, it seemed like everywhere we went was when kids were doing something that they weren't supposed to be doing or that the adult didn't want them to do, to say, no, thank you. like this really sing-songy, oh, no, thank you, sweetie. Like a kid would hit, and then the parent would respond, oh, honey, no, thank you. And I'm sitting here for myself, kind of like, how's that a no thank you? Let's just put this in adulthood. Like if a person hit me, I'm not going to be like, oh, no, thank you. It's like, no, actually, it's not okay to hit. There's like a boundary there. Snatching a toy away from someone. Oh, no, thank you. That's theirs. And if it just plays kick the can. Oh, take this toy instead. It just plays kick the can with the problem. So there's no resilience that gets developed with distraction and redirection. And particularly, think about how those patterns then end up playing out as people get older. Do you want your kids to grow up to be people who are constantly needing distraction in order to cope? Do you want distraction is a helpful thing sometimes, absolutely. Are there times where I deal with stress with some distraction? Of course. But if that's the only tool a kid has, and if in a subtle way that redirection and distraction is communicating to that kid, like, oh, we cannot have the strong feelings, because that's what it's communicating. Like, as a parent, like, I don't want them to get angry. I don't want them to get upset. It's like this tension that starts to come into the picture, and kids pick up on that. I think we want something more for our kids. I think what we actually want, and of course, you do you, like you know your kid better than I do, certainly. But I think what we actually want for our kids is for them to meet those times when the world is not performing according to their expectations with the reality of their feelings, which are, hey, this pissed me off. Hey, I'm really sad. I didn't get my way. Like, yeah, those pretty normal response in terms of emotion to when life doesn't happen the way you want it to. We want our kids to have those feelings authentically, not be distracted and redirected away from those feelings as if those feelings are so terrible that they can't possibly be experienced. And we want our kids to feel those things and then see that they are supported in them. So how this ended up playing out when my daughter was much younger was, if it was something that was a no, it was a no. And absolutely, there were times when she had meltdowns about that. And when she had meltdowns about that, I did my best. And yeah, sometimes it was so frustrating, but I did my best to go, honey, I understand you're frustrated. It feels pretty frustrating, huh? You're feeling angry. Are you feeling sad right now? And what I found was that it was hardest when I started, because that's when the response was most intense. But that with time, she came to understand, like, okay, this is the container. When I get told no, if I don't like it, I have my feelings. And in fact, we talk about the feelings. And sometimes we can negotiate something different. We use tools like taking a deep breath. And these were things that when she was 2 years old, I was saying to myself, okay, right now, this is above her pay grade, right? Cognitively, right now, she doesn't totally understand anything other than I'm being told no, and I'm having a lot of feelings. But my understanding of the psychology of children and child development, and also how conditioning really works and how courage and resilience are developed, really had me go, okay, she doesn't understand this now, but this is paving the way for what comes later. And the sooner you start it, the more you'll benefit from it later. So that's my lens on it. And now I'd like to move to a little bit to what it can be, what it can look like to start doing things like providing a container or modeling emotional resilience. So let's go first to this concept of providing a container. It's actually something I talk about. I'm the director of a life coach training program, for those of you who didn't know, called the Courageous Living Coach Certification. You can learn more about it at teamclcc.com. And when we talk about holding space for clients in CLCC, we talk about setting a container. So when clients have really strong emotional experiences, we don't just want our clients to be spinning out with those emotional experiences. We want to provide a container. So one way to do that with a client would be like talking about, okay, so some pretty strong emotion is coming up right now. Would you like to spend about 10 minutes going into some of that? And I can pause us at the 10-minute mark and just check in. That's a way of setting a container because it's putting time-bound restraints on the experiencing of the emotion, but it's still keeping the client in the driver's seat. 10 minutes, there will be a check-in. You're the one in the driver's seat. You're the one who gets to decide how you want this to go. You can do that with kids too. So a couple ways that this can look. My daughter, when she throws a temper tantrum, she gets opportunities to do it differently, certainly. I check in, I'll say, I'm hearing, if she's saying something that just isn't sounding very kind, say, I'd like to hear that again. Use your kind voice, or please say that again. I'm not okay with being yelled at. So she gets the opportunities to try to do it again. And if she just blows past those or whatever's going on, it's like, okay, it's a timeout. Not timeout punitive, like, oh my God, I'm so disgusted with you, but timeout as in, got a timeout, take a breath. And sometimes she throws a fit about doing a timeout and taking a breath too. And that's when it's like, okay, just that's how this day is going. But most of the time at this point, okay, it's timeout. And then the container is, when you're ready for a do-over, let me know. And usually within about 30 seconds, literally 30 seconds of crying, and that's it. Mommy, I'm ready for a do-over. And we sit down and I'll say to her, now, how do we start a do-over? I ask her that. When she was younger, we always start a do-over by taking a breath. And we would take a breath together. And then clarification, why did mommy put you in timeout? Because she needs to understand why she went to timeout. I don't want her to think, God, I just got in trouble when I don't have any idea why, and now I'm really nervous about that. So we'll talk about why she was in timeout. And then if she feels open to it, and this is also something I let her be in choice around, I'll ask, would you feel like a hug right now after we've talked about it? And 9 times out of 10, she says yes. So your kids, you might be hearing this and going, my kid would never respond to that. My kid would not do what I told them to do. Well, I would question that a little bit because you are the parent and you are the one who gets to determine the boundaries. You're the one. A kid can throw all the fits they want, but the buck stops with you. A kid can really act out in a lot of ways, but the buck stops with you for saying, here is what does and does not work in our home. Here's how we handle upsets. Here's how we handle times when we disagree. And I see parenting as being a combination of needing to teach a skill set while also being that soft space to land for a kid who is grappling with the futility and the failures of not doing that skill set very well because they're not going to. So it's moving out of this punitive space of, okay, I'm going to raise a courageous kid. The buck stops with me. They have to do what I say, and that's it. Da da da. It's a little more nuanced than that, what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about holding a container that has some level of boundaries. Everybody knows what the consequences are if those boundaries are transgressed. Before we even get to the point of a consequence, everybody's aware of the possibility to try to do it over. There's as much patience and clear communication as possible. And we're all doing the best with this skill set that we can. Here's how we do things in this house. This is how we do things in this house. The only thing kids know is the world that they are in that is, again, coming from these 3 different places of their own will, the authority figures around them, and the social or external environment that they're in. That's what kids know. If you were to take a child and put it in a gated, walled-off compound, and you taught that child that the Easter Bunny and Santa Claus are real, and you never showed them anything different and they never had any exposure to anyone in the outside world, chances are they would probably believe that the Easter Bunny and Santa Claus are real for their entire lives. So guess what? You're the one who can teach your kids. This is what we do when we're frustrated. We try taking a breath. We try asking for a hug. We try taking a walk. We try talking about our feelings. We try using a kinder voice. This is what we do if somebody hits someone. If you hit your little brother, this is how I will handle this. And particularly with boundaries and very small children, it needs to be something of, I know what my protocol is, and we do not pass go. We do not collect $200. If you hit your little brother, this is what I do. I'm not saying that to a very young child you actually necessarily say that. You decide if it's going to be that way, but it could be something, especially with a very young child. Hitting is not okay. If I see you hit, you will have to sit in timeout. Hitting is not okay. If I see you hit, you will have to sit in timeout. And it might be that you have to repeat that, and you're going to have ups with it and downs with it, just like you do with potty training, just like you do with kids learning how to go to sleep, just like you do with so many things with kids. You have good days, you have bad days. But the consistency of setting that container is you, because you are one of the most primary things that is forming their world. Now, speaking of you being the person who's setting their world to some extent, let's talk about you modeling courage. So a lot of what we talk about with kids is about discipline, about how we handle timeouts or do-overs and the things I've been talking about so far. But what about you? I mean, to me, the biggest magnifying glass, I guess you could say, in terms of parenting has less to do with discipline and more to do with how I act on a daily basis. What am I doing or saying? What is my energy when I'm frustrated, like just with life? And what am I teaching my daughter about those times? You know, I'm sitting here and the coronavirus shit show is happening and it's not fun and there's a lot of stress and there's a lot going on. How am I talking about the coronavirus when it comes up with my kid? Am I talking about it with a lot of anxiety? Am I talking about it in the next room with a lot of anxiety with my husband? How am I handling it? Because my kid has her own will, and she's in a limited environment right now because of shelter in place, and she's taking a hell of a lot of cues from me. So what are we teaching our kids about how we manage stress, about how we handle our fear? Speaking of which, if we don't want our kids to pathologize emotions, how are we talking to our kids about emotions, and how are we handling our own? One of the things that can really scare kids is seeing emotions coming from adults and not having a context for those emotions. So anytime my husband and I get into a snippy little argument, we make a point of actually sitting down afterwards and trying to close the loop, so to speak, by actually saying to her, hey, sweetie, Mom and Dad, we were getting really grumpy with each other, weren't we? And she'll, yeah. It's like, we needed to take a breath. We needed to slow down. We're really sorry that we were getting so grumpy with each other. And usually she's kind of, has this kind of like look on her face like, yeah, good thing you're saying that to me. And then she just goes back to doing whatever she's doing. So I'm not suggesting that how you model expression of emotion or handling of emotion has to be this deep analysis with your kids where you suddenly start going, so you see, mommy has a pattern where, and daddy has a pattern where, and then da-da-da. It's just like, hey, we're two people. We got grumpy with each other. We needed to take a breath. We needed to slow down. Same thing with when something happens that is just really, really stressful. I had a situation a couple weeks ago. It was after coronavirus happened and we're moving to a different state, and some stuff started to get shaken up with my husband's job. And then it was a couple of bad emails in my own inbox that I was stressed out about. And I just started feeling really weepy. And I knew that, okay, I'm feeling really weepy. And so I just need to kind of cry it out. And I was doing that, just kind of sitting and kind of crying. And my husband came in, gave me a hug. And then our daughter heard, and she came in, and, she's seeing mom cry, and she's kind of freaked out about that a little bit. And then it was wiping my face and just going, "Oh, sweetie, I'm just having some feelings. I just have a lot of feelings coming up right now, but I'm going to be okay." And you know what she says to me? She goes, "Mommy, do you need to take a breath?" And it's just oh, thank God. And the kids are going to be all right, because this is it, right? This is what I'm wanting. What I'm wanting is her to not see adults or myself or her father as these sort of infallible people who are always stoic, who never have emotion. I'm also not wanting to just dump emotion all over the place. I'm wanting her to have an appropriate context for emotion. So just consider for yourself that part of raising courageous kids is to give them the tools to understand that the big scary emotions that they sometimes feel or that they witness other people feel, there's a context for that. There's a way of framing it, a way of making meaning about it. Yeah, this is part of the human experience. Sometimes people have a lot of feelings. And great, when they have a lot of feelings, they get to cry for a minute. And great, Dad was giving me a hug. And great, even this wise little 5-year-old can be part of a community, a familial community, coming together to help and support one another. What a wonderful expression of empathy. So I saw that moment as a really beautiful moment. And I think that during especially times of high stress, as adults, how do we help our kids see the context for the stress? How do we help our kids to see their own humanity amid stress? Last thing I want to say is, for any parent who's listening to this and you're really beating yourself up over past parenting mistakes, or you're really worried that different things you've done are forever changing your child, or that the world is forever changing your child, or all the things that can come up, what I would offer to you is this. Someday, despite your best efforts, your kids, if they feel safe enough to do this with you, are going to tell you about things that you've done that they wish you had done differently. And I will never forget the time that a client of mine told me about their mother, who had been who had quit her job, stayed at home with them, sent them to schools that followed a cooperative model so that they could basically go to school with them every day and see them every day and be in the room with them doing the popsicle art projects and all the things. Like this mom was I am the devoted mom. And my client was it was so suffocating. And I didn't want my mom to go to school with me. And I didn't want her to stay home and be there every day when it came from it. And it was just one of those moments that really reminds me that sometimes what we think our kids need isn't actually what they need. B, sometimes even if what our kids need is what we know they need and we do that anyway, they're not going to appreciate it later. They're not going to necessarily have a story of, oh, wow, so great that my mom did those things. And see, we're all doing the best that we can. So to me, someday, this is a little time capsule of sorts. 10 years from now or 20 years from now, who knows where this audio file will be at that time. But someday my daughter might come to me and actually tell me that this entire model that I'm laying out here didn't work for her in some way. So far seems to be doing pretty well. She seems to be pretty resilient and adaptable. And I mean, even amid coronavirus and not getting to hang out with other kids all these weeks, she's just a little giggle box and, silly and all those things. But I accept that someday she might approach me and say, I needed this or that other thing to be different. What I would like to give her would not be, you're wrong, and I actually did the things that were best for you, so you'd better appreciate them. I would also not want to beat up on myself. Oh my God, I should have done it all differently. Oh my God. I would want to respect her experience. I would want to respect the experience that she's bringing to me about her understanding of herself and what she needs or needed. I would want to offer an apology for any places where I didn't meet the unique needs of her. I would want to let her know that I was doing my best and that I gave it intentionality and presence and care, but that I also get it. She might need something different than what I currently offer. And I always want to be really sensitive to pivots in parenting as she grows and as she develops, and to feedback. I'm getting more of that as she gets older. But in general, it really is about releasing oneself from the tyranny of trying to do motherhood or parenthood perfectly. Because you won't, even if you try. You just won't. You might be like this client. You might be the mother that so many people would say is the dream mother, and it's just not what my client needed. And you might be a mother doing your very, very best, and your kid might still say, it wasn't what I needed. What I want, though, and what I think you probably want too, is to feel connected to your kids, to respect them as individuals, yet maintain that connection. And that means respecting that they're saying, I needed something different. Like, okay, I hear you. You needed something different. I hear that. I honor that. I respect that. It helps you get out of the perfectionism. It helps you get out of the pressure because it's not all on your shoulders. Again, your kids are influenced by you, yes, but you are just one of 3 different factors. The other 2 being the kids' own individual will and what they came into the world with, and the external world, the social world that they are in. And you can't control all of those factors. You can only control the part of you that goes, I love this kid fiercely. I will do the absolute best I can to meet this kid's needs and grow this kid into an adult that is resilient and strong. And the rest, I surrender. I surrender. I surrender. And hopefully you're also seeing too that you yourself have survived some bumps and bruises, and you yourself have grown into a person who has a lot of great things about themselves that other people love and value and care for and appreciate about you. The kids are going to be all right. Show up with love. Show up with boundaries in a container and a willingness to say, here's how we're going to do this. Love, boundaries, respect, it's all a big mishmash. You're doing the best you can, and actually, I bet you're doing really, really great. All right, that's today's podcast. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. You know you can continue the work and the fun if you want to. Head on over to yourcourageouslife.com/begin and become a Your Courageous Life subscriber, because as soon as you sign up, you get access to an entire library of worksheets and audios and other bonuses. And of course, you'll be receiving more courage in your inbox. And who wouldn't love that? You can learn more about the Courageous Living Coach certification at teamclcc.com. You can get the Courage Habit at your local bookseller, on Amazon, wherever you like. We can even connect on social media. I'm on Facebook at Your Courageous Life. So look for facebook.com/Your Courageous Life. And I'm on Instagram as Kate Courageous. And I'd love to connect with you on Instagram. So here's to you. using these courageous tools in your life and creating a real ripple effect of good. And again, thanks so much for listening. I love it that you're here.